Hello, this is MovieMash Recapped. I'm going to discuss the American horror movie, The Boy today. Warning, this contains spoilers. Be cautious and mindful. Greta Evans, a British woman, leaves her home country to work as a nanny for a wealthy family. The owner is gone, so as soon as she arrives, she kicks off her shoes and explores the mansion. The appearance of a man named Malcolm surprises her. Malcolm is a frequent visitor and a local delivery man. Malcolm then asks Greta to come on a tour. Mrs. Heelshire, the wife of the house owner, arrives shortly after. She is an elderly woman. Where are Greta's shoes? Wonders Mrs. Heelshire. Greta reveals the spot where she removed her shoes, and to her surprise, they are gone. Mrs. Heelshire remarks sarcastically that her son is most likely to blame. Greta is then invited to meet Mr. Heelshire by Mrs. Heelshire. She also presents her to the boy that she is expected to watch. She is shocked to learn that this boy is actually Brahms, a porcelain doll. She chuckles, perceiving it as a joke. However, Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire appear grave. Mrs. Heelshire informs Greta that although other nannies sought for the position, Brahms rejected them on the grounds that they are not attractive or young. Greta receives instruction from the Heelshires on how to take care of Brahms, along with a set of stringent guidelines. This entails playing loud music for Brahms, reading to him aloud, establishing a mousetrap, keeping leftovers in the refrigerator, and kissing him goodnight. Greta is informed by Mrs. Heelshire that Brahms is reserved and only moves when no one is around. Next, Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire ask Brahms what he thinks of Greta. Greta finds what she is seeing odd. For solitude, Mr. Heelshire shuts the door. Soon afterward, the two of them emerge to inform Greta that Brahms likes her and wants her to watch him. Greta gives her sister a call to share what happened to her in the residence. Greta overhears Mrs. Heelshire the next day, and she is upset that Brahms ended up ransacking his room. Mr. Heelshire then appears and announces that they are departing on holiday, leaving Greta by herself with Brahms. Mr. Heelshire presents Greta with a handful of her daily schedules. Greta starts disobeying the rules when they depart, leaving Brahms alone. When Greta awakens in the middle of the night to weird noises, she searches for the source of the disturbance right away. As she stands in front of the artwork, a hand appears out of the wall, ready to strangle her. As it happens, it's a nightmare. Greta then enters Brahms' room and notices that tears are starting to form in his eyes. Examining reveals that there is a leak in the ceiling. Suddenly that evening, Greta receives a call. But nobody says anything when she picks it up. Greta inquires about Brahms when Malcolm arrives in the morning to deliver groceries. Malcolm informs her that Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire had only one kid, Brahms, who was originally a genuine boy. However, one day their home caught fire, and Brahms perished as a result of not being able to flee in time. The family is merely using the doll as a coping tool to deal with their loss. Malcolm then proposes to her on a date for that evening.
Greta concurs.
Greta gets for the date. Greta shuts the door as she notices Brahms staring at her during a phone conversation with her sister. Greta keeps taking her shower. She is shocked to see, though, that her clothing and necklace are gone, and her hair has been chopped. Then, Greta hurries to find it after hearing strange noises in the attic. The attic ladder abruptly closes on its own as she ascends it. Greta is imprisoned within. Greta cries out for assistance, but Malcolm doesn't hear her when he comes to get her, and instead he walks away. Greta then looks for an alternative exit. She is startled when a massive shadow abruptly materializes in front of her face. She then passes out. Greta wakes up in the morning and is inexplicably led outside. Malcolm is told by her what transpired the previous evening. As it happens, the ladder has the ability to open and close by itself. When Greta presses Malcolm about Brahms once again, he replies that there are two rumors circulating concerning the composer. There are others in the town who sympathize with him because they recall him as a good youngster, but there are also those who maintain the boy was bad. Greta gives her sister another call later that evening. Her sister informs her that Cole, her violent ex-boyfriend, has been attempting to locate her. Greta is enraged with Cole. Greta was beaten by Cole and had a miscarriage. After that, Greta brushes her teeth and gets ready for bed. She hears a weird noise coming from Brahms' room as she is about to finish brushing her teeth. She comes over. and a ton of papers are strewn all over Brahms' filthy room. After she straightened Brahms's cocked head, the head began to move on its own, but it was simply another nightmare. When Greta visits Brahms' room the following day, she finds that he is moved. Sitting with her schedule next to him, he seems to be requesting that Greta follow the plan and do everything on time. Startled, Greta rushes to her room and tries to get in touch with her sister. The phone rings out of the blue, and as Greta answers, she hears a child's voice telling her to follow the rules. Then, a shadow appears under the door, and Greta hears a child's voice once more, realizing that the doll is far more secretive than she had thought. It is alive. When Greta opens the door, she finds a tray of food that Brahms has given her, and she feels conflicted. It turns out that Brahms is merely craving her attention and has no intention of hurting her. When she contacts Malcolm to tell him about it, he doesn't seem to be interested in her. Later on, a scene shows Mrs. and Mr. Heelshire writing Brahms a letter that begins, "We cannot bear to live with what you have become. Now that the girl is yours." Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire shove rocks inside their coats and kill themselves after penning this letter. Greta is then beginning to be kind to Brahms and carry out the tasks assigned to her after realizing that Brahms is merely the spirit of a helpless little child who needs to be taken care of. Malcolm arrives the next day bearing a letter from Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire. That evening, he also asks Greta to go for a walk. But now that she feels accountable for Brahms, Greta declines Malcolm's request. Malcolm walks away, disappointed. Then, Brahms surprises Greta by being able to move independently. Greta invites Malcolm to visit the next day in an attempt to prove that Brahms is still alive. She first falls short in her attempt to prove it because the doll only moves when no one is around. The doll then moves after she leaves it alone. Malcolm eventually comes to believe her. Malcolm spends the night with Greta. Spending time together is what the two are doing. But Brahms, who may be jealous, interrupts them in their tracks. Then, in the kitchen, the two of them converse. When Malcolm senses that Greta is growing close to him, he gives her a heads up by outlining the specifics of Brahms' demise. From what he gathers, Brahms played with Emily Cribbs, a girl about his own age, when he was younger. Emily went to the Heelshire mansion to play with Brahms on his 8th birthday, and she never came back. Her head was crushed when her body was subsequently found in the woods. The mansion was already on fire when the police arrived to investigate the young kid, and Brahms was subsequently discovered dead. Malcolm draws the conclusion that Brahms' spirit, which is housed in the doll, would be malevolent as a result. Greta's violent ex-boyfriend Cole arrives to the estate in the morning with the intention of making Greta go back home. Malcolm remains close by to ensure Greta's safety. Greta asks the doll for assistance at night. When Cole awakens, he finds a note telling him to leave scrawled in blood. He feels enraged, thinking it was done by Malcolm or Greta. She tries to explain to him that Brahms used rat blood to accomplish it, but he doesn't want to believe her. Malcolm eventually joins them and makes an effort to persuade Cole that the doll is more complex than it first appears. In a flash of rage, Cole destroys the doll completely. At this point, the home lights begin to flicker. They hear sounds coming from behind the walls as the home starts to tremble. Cole makes an effort to locate the source of the noise, and then the mirror bursts into fragments. Cole falls behind. A man who appears out of a hole behind it is the real, adult Brahms, dressed in a porcelain mask that exactly matches the doll's face. Brahms beats Cole and kills him, frightening Malcolm and Greta, who flee for their lives. Greta and Malcolm find Brahms' room, where a doll made out of Greta's missing dress, hair, and jewelry sits on Brahms' bed, indicating that Brahms has been observing Greta for some time. Greta also finds the farewell letter from the Heelshires, revealing their scheme to leave Greta behind as a mate for Brahms. Brahms then locates them. Malcolm is knocked out by Brahms, who then threatens to murder him if Greta departs. Greta manages to get out of the house, but she comes back to get Malcolm. She grabs a screwdriver, calls out the rules, and puts Brahms to bed. She stabs him when he tries to give her a good-night kiss. When she pushes the weapon deeper in, Brahms tries to suffocate her and falls to the ground. Malcolm is saved by Greta, and together they flee the home. Brahms is seen piecing the doll back together in the movie's last shot, implying that he is most likely still alive. In light of all of this, we can conclude that Brahms was never really dead. He was always a perverse little child who killed Emily Cribbs on his 8th birthday. His parents set fire to their own home, staged his death, and concealed him inside their opulent estate in order to protect him from the outside world. It also raises questions about the reasons behind Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire's suicide, concluding that their guilt overcame their love for their child and they took their own lives. Throughout the film, a number of clues are dropped that set up the big reveal. Mrs. Heelshire makes it obvious that Brahms liked loud music early in the film when she informs Greta of the house rules. This implies that music, or anything read aloud to Brahms, should be loud enough to be heard through the walls because he lives inside them. The Heelshires appear to be particularly picky about having no rodents in their home. They stress that she must maintain the mouse traps clean in order to prevent any mice from getting into the house's walls. Additionally, Mr. Heelshire informs her that they store all of their uneaten food, and it is clear that Brahms receives all of it. Greta is informed by Mrs. Heelshire that Brahms is reserved and only moves when no one is around. This demonstrates that the doll was always being manipulated by the real Brahms who resides within the walls rather than by itself. My interpretation of the film, The Boy, is as follows. To support the channel and see more videos similar to this one, subscribe, enable notifications, and leave likes. Thanks for watching.